And so I'd like to welcome you to my online webinar titled A New Conversation with Men. I'm your host, Coach Michael Taylor. And for those of you who may not know who Michael Taylor is, I'd like to give you a little introduction. And I could start off by saying I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an author, motivational speaker, radio and TV show host. But that's kind of surfacey stuff. Let me share with you how I came to this place where I'm now having a webinar titled A New Conversation with Men. You see, some 20 years ago, I had lived the so-called American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids and all of that, and by society standards, I was pretty successful. And within approximately a 6-year time frame, I watched that dream turn into a nightmare as I went through a divorce, a bankruptcy, foreclosure, basically lost everything. So there I was, bankrupt and all alone, and very confused because I had did everything I thought a man was supposed to do to be happy, but I was absolutely miserable. And so during the darkest period of my life, I was sitting up late one night, and I couldn't sleep because I was so depressed. And as I was looking across my room, I noticed that all the books on my bookshelf had something to do with making money. And as I sat there staring at the books, this question just sort of popped in my head. And the question was this: Michael, what if you took all the energy and effort you've used in trying to get rich and simply learn how to be happy? And it was that one question that literally changed and saved my life. Because as a result of asking myself that one question, I stopped chasing money, and I decided that I wanted to figure out how to become truly happy. Because I remembered as a kid, I remember feeling happy. I remember what it felt like to feel alive, and I had lost that. And so I went on this amazing journey of transformation. And so for the next 15 years, I was attending seminars, reading books, listening to audio programs, and I went on this deep spiritual journey to discover who Michael Taylor really is. And as a result of that journey, as a result of a lot of self-introspection, and again, hundreds and hundreds of hours of workshops and seminars and books, I can honestly say now that in this very moment as I'm speaking to you, I've never been happier in my life. I can honestly say that every day for me is a joy. Now, obviously there are challenges, without question, but I can honestly say that I feel alive. I feel passionate. I feel purposeful. And my commitment is to support and empower other men to feel the same way. You see, because it is my belief that one of the greatest challenges we have in our society and the world at large today is to redefine masculinity. This is my belief. I believe that the most important thing that we're actually not talking about is to how to redefine what it means to be a man. Because I believe too many men are trapped in what I'll call an antiquated paradigm of masculinity. And my definition of a paradigm is simply a rigid way of believing, thinking, and behaving. And so I believe too many men have limited beliefs about what it means to be a man, which creates how they think about being men and ultimately how they act as men. And so if we're wanting to change the paradigm of masculinity, we have to do those three things. We have to challenge men to look at what they believe, what they think, and how they act. Because if you really stop and think about it, have you noticed how throughout our media, excuse me, how negatively men are portrayed? Have you really paid attention to the messages and the images about men throughout our society? You see, for the most part, most of those images and messages are pretty negative. We see stories of infidelity, domestic violence, senseless acts of violence, where the guy goes into the Navy Yard and just starts randomly shooting people. We see corporate corruption and greed. And so for the most part, throughout our media, it appears that most men are pretty bad men. And so I believe the question we have to start asking ourselves is, how can we challenge men? How can we support men to move past a lot of the negative beliefs and behaviors that's driving their behavior? Which ultimately leads to what I consider to be one of the most important questions that I have yet to hear really anyone ask when it comes to men, and especially around violence. And here's that question that nobody's asking. The question that we have to figure out and answer is, what is it that is hurting these men so badly that they feel they have to hurt other people in order to heal it? Now, I borrowed that quote from a gentleman named Neil Donald Walsh, and I believe it is a very powerful, powerful question that we as a society have to ask, and we as men individually have to ask. What is it that is hurting us so badly that we feel we have to hurt others in order to try to heal it? You see, because I believe that only a hurt person will hurt another person. And if we truly want to create a new paradigm of masculinity, we have to get to the source of that hurt. We have to get to the cause of behavior versus dealing with the effects of behavior. See, because in our society, what we want to do is we want to try to create new laws, build more prisons, and all of these things deal with the effect. It doesn't deal with the cause. So we have to start dealing with and addressing the cause. And I believe that the cause is emotional. Now, right now, there's a lot of conversation around mental health. We hear that a lot in the media, mental health. And for the most part, yes, I agree with mental health, but I believe, more importantly, it's not mental as much as it is emotional. Because a lot of men, I believe, are in so much pain that that's the only way they know how to act out. And so until we deal with and address that pain, we will never change men's behavior. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating a new revolution. And I'm calling this revolution a new conversation with men. And my intention is to empower men to live extraordinary lives. And yet there are a lot of people, men, that reject this idea because the current level of consciousness around men is so strong and pervasive. A lot of men aren't ready for this conversation. But I also know that there are a lot of men who are. I believe that men are really hungry for this dialogue because I believe men are tired of divorces and being separated from their kids and working at jobs that they hate and feeling stressed out and just no meaning in their lives. I think men are hungry for this dialogue. And that's why I've started a new conversation with men. I want to empower those men who are ready to embrace this new idea about redefining masculinity. And I do this through my books, through my radio show, through this webinar, seminars, and lectures. Because I have made it my life's work to transform the world one man at a time. So what I want to do tonight is I want to share some ideas that over the last 15 years or so I've gained through my research and through writing that have really supported and helped me become a better man. And one of the most important conversations I think we as men need to have is what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. You see, it is my belief that there are 5 illusions that are perpetuated throughout our media that drives most of our behavior as men. And unfortunately, most men are unconscious that these illusions even exist. And so I want to share these 5 illusions because they are really the foundation of my teaching. Because I believe that when men grasp these 5 illusions and wake up from them, I believe that men can live more rewarding and fulfilling lives. Now, before I share the 5 illusions, I know there are probably some people out there who may be saying, oh yeah, we've heard this before. And you're advocating that men don't take responsibility for their actions. Well, let me say this. First and foremost, I believe every man is 100% responsible for his actions. Always. But I also know that the media structure that we live in, the society and culture that we live in, can affect our decision making and our actions. And so as men, we have to take 100% responsibility for our actions and recognize that although the media can influence our behavior, we are always 100% responsible for our actions. So I want to share with you these 5 illusions of manhood. And I believe that when men really grasp these ideas and make a conscious decision to wake up from these illusions, they can shift the man's perspective and his attitude toward life. And so let's begin with illusion number 1. Illusion number 1 is to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. And it is my belief that that is, excuse me, that is the most powerful illusion. And actually all the other illusions are wrapped around this one, or come underneath this one illusion, is that somehow in our culture and society since the beginning of time, as men, we've been taught and conditioned to believe that it's not okay for us to feel. From a very early age, we're taught that it's not okay to be in touch with our emotions. And it is my belief that it isn't until we deal with our emotions, it isn't until we make the commitment to get into our hearts that we can really change and transform our lives. And one of the first things we have to do is be willing to wake up from this illusion that as men, we aren't supposed to feel. You see, it is my belief that emotions are simply energy in motion. I believe we have them for a reason. They're a part of us. In my judgment, in my belief system, emotions are simply your soul's way of communicating with you. They're just impulses of energy that really express what's going on around you and the reality that you're in. So there's really no such thing as good emotions or bad emotions. They're simply emotions. But too many times as men, we don't understand and can't identify them, and therefore we can't act appropriately when we have them. You see, in our culture, for the most part, anger is an accepted emotion for men. Oh, he's just being a man. And we rationalize and justify anger and violence because we say that's what men are supposed to do. Well, I believe that until we learn or teach men how to deal with anger appropriately, we will never remove all the violence from our society. Because once again, I believe that the reason a lot of these men are acting out in this way is because the emotion of anger and sadness and fear are trapped inside of these men, and they don't know how to just express them. Therefore, they act out in the only way they know how, which unfortunately in a lot of cases is anger. And so what we have to be willing to do as men is to wake up from this idea that men aren't supposed to feel. That means we must be willing to do the emotional and psychological work to heal our hearts from any wounds that may be there. Wounds that may have begun in childhood. Wounds that may have come from a series of disappointments and setbacks in our lives. We experience wounds, but as men, again, we're taught that we're not supposed to feel them. But it's important now that we change this conversation and recognize that if we can feel it, we can heal it. And so our commitment should be to start healing the hurts, the wounds that are within us. It is the only way, I believe, that we will begin to remove most of the violence that's perpetuated throughout our society. So that's illusion number one, is that to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. Illusion number two, and this is an illusion that has been perpetuated since the beginning of time. And that illusion is that to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. You see, too many times men believe that sleeping with as many women as possible is how they define their identity. We're taught from a very early age that our goal is to go out and try to sleep with as many women as possible. Turn on the television and look at what you see on TV. What do you see? Sex sales. Everywhere you look, we're inundated with this idea that as men, our job, our responsibility is to have sex. And unfortunately, what has happened, I believe, is that too many men have forgotten or never learned that it's not just about sex, it's about intimacy and connection and making love. But when we get trapped in this illusion that we have to use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood, then we use sex as a physical act, as a way to simply feel good about ourselves. And I believe that's why so many men are unhappy and unfulfilled in their relationships. Because their whole intention is for physical conquering. It's for validating their masculinity through the act of sex, rather than creating true intimacy and connection with someone that they truly care about. And so if we want to start talking about changing or resolving a lot of the societal ills that plague our world and our country, then we need to look at this and examine why is it that so many of us as men feel that we're supposed to conquer women. What drives that? Well, as mentioned, I believe it's because we live in a culture and a society that promotes it. And too many times men follow what we see throughout our media. So it is our responsibility to begin waking up from this illusion and recognizing that it is absolutely okay to be monogamous. It is absolutely okay to be in love with someone, to open your heart and to share yourself with someone, and not just try to get notches on your belt by sleeping with as many women as possible. Men need to have this conversation. We must wake up from that illusion that to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. Illusion number three. Illusion number three is to be a man, you must have money and material possessions. Now this one's a little tricky because there's absolutely nothing wrong with making money. But unfortunately, too many men, their entire self-esteem is built around their stuff, the things that they have. Have you ever heard the saying, keeping up with the Joneses? Well, the reason we have that phenomenon is because as men, we're taught that we're supposed to have stuff to validate ourselves as men. So we go for the cars that we know we can't afford. We buy houses that we know we don't need. We spend money on things that really don't fulfill us. Why? Because we're trapped in this idea that as men, we're supposed to have money and material possessions and we're supposed to show it off to our friends. And so we must be willing to wake up from that illusion and recognize that money doesn't make you a man. And it definitely will not always make you happy. And this is a difficult pill for some men to swallow because we've been taught that that's how we gain our identity, through our stuff. So we want to wake up from that illusion that to be a man, you must have money and material possessions. And at the same time, once again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with making a lot of money. Trust me. But it was once said that what good does it profit a man to gain the world if he loses his soul in the process? Too many of us as men, we're losing our soul in the process by trying to accumulate stuff. So let's wake up from that illusion. Illusion number 4 is to be a man, you must have titles, positions, and power. You see, somehow in our society, we have it set up that a person that has a PhD is somehow better than some man that may have just a GED. And I completely disagree with that. Having a PhD does not necessarily make you a better man than someone who doesn't have a degree. But once again, in our society and culture, we promote this idea that men who have titles, positions, and power are somehow better, which isn't true. The sad part about this is a lot of men that don't have those titles feel inadequate as men. Therefore, they don't reach their full potential because they're trying to compete with the other guys. So I say let's just blow up that conversation and recognize that titles, positions, and power do not make you better men. Simple. And last but not least, the 5th illusion of manhood is that to be a man, you must constantly compete against and try to outdo other men. You see, there's this amazing undercurrent that men don't really talk about, but there's this competitive nature that we're always trying to outdo each other. Absolutely nothing wrong with competition in the right context. But what I'm talking about here is that some men always think that they need to one-up each other. And I believe it's time to remove that competition and recognize that as men, we have to learn how to support and empower each other. And that's going to take a big shift because the male ego is pretty strong. And a lot of men aren't really comfortable with this idea. But that's why I'm calling this a new conversation with men. I want to wake men up to this idea that we do not have to compete against each other. There's enough for everyone to go around. So there you have them, the 5 illusions of manhood. Let me recap them for you. Number 1, to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. Number 2, to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. Number 3, you must have money and material possessions. Number 4, you must have titles, positions, and power. And number 5, to be a man, you must constantly compete with and try to outdo other men. In my new conversation with men, I'm challenging men to wake up from these illusions and to embrace the idea that the only thing a man needs is himself, to feel fulfilled, to have meaning in his life, and to be purposeful. It's all possible for us if we're willing to wake up from these illusions and embrace who we really are. And so, once we recognize these 5 illusions, then relationships take on a whole new meaning as men. Because in this new conversation with men, one of the things that I'm promoting is that as men, we make relationships top priority in our lives. You see, I believe that relationships are the glue that holds our lives together. And it's important that we create relationships that are nurturing, rewarding, fulfilling, connected, intimate commitments to someone that we want to spend the rest of our lives with. And I'm not saying that you have to get married to do that. I'm saying that you make a commitment to creating authentic relationships. You see, we talk about how important our relationships are, but if you really stop and think about it, most of us as men don't put a lot of emphasis on our relationships. And one of the reasons that we don't is because we're trapped in that first illusion that we aren't supposed to be emotional, Well, we have to understand that you can't be relational if you're unwilling to be emotional. And if you truly want to create great relationships, you got to have your heart involved. You have to be willing to be emotional. And this is a stretch for a lot of men. But we must make the commitment to make relationships top priority in our lives. Because generally speaking, I believe most men really do want to have great relationships. Unfortunately, they don't have the emotional tools to make that a reality. And most men are too afraid to do the emotional work that will allow them to create connected relationships. Once again, that's why a new conversation with men is so important. We must make the commitment to do the emotional work that will support us in creating great relationships. You see, all this 50% divorce rate and domestic violence and all of those things that we see that's so pervasive in our society will never be resolved until we, as men, make the commitment to making relationships top priority. And that doesn't mean that women aren't responsible for their portion in relationships or bad relationships. But this is about men, so I'm not going to focus on the women. But yes, they have a responsibility too. But most importantly, in this conversation with men, we must be willing to ask ourselves deeper questions. Questions like, what is it that may be keeping me from connecting emotionally to the person that I love? What is it that's keeping me from being the best father to my children? What is it that's keeping me from feeling alive and passionate about life? Well, if we ask ourselves that question, the answer will be found in our emotions. Because our emotions are at the center of our being. And if we're not in touch with them, we can never truly be happy and fulfilled. And so this is my new revolution. Empowering men to have a new conversation. A conversation in which we blow up the antiquated paradigms of masculinity and awaken to some new ways of being and relating as men. And this is no small task. Trust me, I have to admit that there are a lot of men who actually are rejecting this whole idea, and that's okay. But for those men who are ready, for those men who know deep within their own heart and soul that life can be better, it can be different, then this revolution is for them. And so my invitation to you is to join me in this revolution. Join me in this movement in which we empower men to wake up from the illusions, to discover who they really are, and to support them in living extraordinary lives. Because I know without question that if I can go from losing absolutely everything to rebuilding my life, creating a wonderful 12-year marriage in which I can honestly say that I'm truly happy and fulfilled, then I know it's possible for all men. But the question becomes, how many men are willing to put forth the effort to make this a reality? Well, know that my commitment is to sharing this information with as many men as possible, and I'd like to enroll you in my vision of creating this new conversation. And so you can do that simply by posting your comments below this video. Let me know what you think, because I'll be doing a series of online events, and I'd really love to get your feedback. And you can also find me online at www.coachmichaeltaylor.com, or you can find me there at www.anewconversationwithmen.com. Go to my websites and sign up for my newsletter. Stay in touch with me if you're committed to empowering men to live extraordinary lives. Because a new conversation with men is going to take men of all ethnicities, all religions, all political affiliations, men who are simply committed to creating a new paradigm of masculinity which empowers men to reach their full potential and live extraordinary lives. I want to thank you in advance for watching and participating in this webinar. As mentioned, I would truly appreciate any comments that you have, and you can find me online at coachmichaeltaylor.com or newconversationwithmen.com. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next webinar. Have a wonderful weekend.